20. Black lesbians who died of HIV. Hollywood then and now. What if I told you that some of the most influential and courageous black queer women in history were silenced, too soon lost to an epidemic that devastated entire communities? These trailblazers didn't just fight for their own lives, they fought for visibility, equality, and justice in a world that tried to erase them. From groundbreaking writers and activists to fearless artists and performers, their legacies continue to shape culture and inspire generations. Yet their names often remain buried beneath layers of stigma and silence. In this video, Legends of Black Excellence brings you the powerful stories of 20 black queer women who died from complications related to HIV/AIDS, women whose voices changed history, even if the world wasn't ready to listen. Prepare to be shocked, moved, and inspired as we honor their lives and illuminate their extraordinary impact. Don't forget to hit the like button if you value these stories and subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening content celebrating Black excellence and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Whose story touched you most, and why do you think it's crucial we keep their memories alive? Let's start this important conversation right now. Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde was a literary revolutionary whose life's mission was to amplify the voices of those long silenced by systemic oppression. Born on February 18, 1934 in New York City, to Caribbean immigrant parents, she would grow into one of the most uncompromising and eloquent writers, theorists, and activists of the 20th century. Identifying as a black lesbian feminist, Lorde boldly embraced all her identities at a time when doing so invited hostility from nearly every direction: race, gender, sexuality, and class. Lorde's body of work, which includes acclaimed books such as Zombie, A New Spelling of My Name, The Cancer Journals, and Sister Outsider, intricately weaves personal experience with political commentary. Her essays, speeches, and poetry are not simply works of literature, they are calls to arms. She addressed issues like racism in feminist movements, homophobia within black communities, and the invisibility of lesbians in civil rights discourse, often challenging even her allies to rethink their assumptions. One of her most famous quotes, "Your silence will not protect you," remains an enduring mantra for those fighting for liberation across the globe. Lorde believed deeply in the power of language as a tool for survival, transformation, and justice. She urged marginalized individuals to find power in speaking their truths and to confront the discomfort that such honesty might provoke. Despite being diagnosed with breast cancer in 1978, Lorde refused to retreat into silence. Instead, she documented her journey through the illness in the Cancer Journals, rejecting societal expectations of femininity and refusing to wear a prosthetic breast. This act of defiance became symbolic of her broader resistance to conformity and invisibility. In her later years, Lorde took her activism international. She moved to Berlin, where she engaged with Afro-German women and helped cultivate an emerging black feminist movement in Europe. Her presence and mentorship sparked political consciousness and organization among black European communities previously disconnected from one another. Though she was not HIV positive herself, Lorde's work intersected deeply with the HIV/AIDS crisis. She stood in solidarity with those affected, particularly black lesbians and gay men, whose suffering was often ignored by the public and even their own communities. She emphasized healthcare inequality and advocated for dignity in the face of illness and stigma. Her unwavering support for those living with HIV/AIDS helped humanize the epidemic beyond statistics and news coverage. Audre Lorde passed away on November 17, 1992, after a 14-year battle with cancer. She was 58. In the final years of her life, she adopted an African name, Gamba Adisa, meaning warrior she who makes her meaning known. A title that encapsulates her lifelong mission. Audre Lorde was more than a poet. She was a visionary, a mentor, a fighter. Her legacy is a blueprint for intersectional activism, and her words remain etched into the hearts of those still carrying forward the fight for equity, authenticity, and freedom. Through her life and literature, Lorde proved that truth, when spoken boldly, can shake the world. Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan stands as one of the most formidable figures in American political history. Born on February 21, 1936 in Houston, Texas, she rose from the segregated South to become the first African-American woman elected to the Texas Senate, and later the first black woman from the South to serve in the United States Congress. Her voice, strong, commanding, and steeped in conviction, made her one of the most recognizable orators of the 20th century. Jordan's landmark moment came during the 1974 House Judiciary Committee hearings on the impeachment of President Richard Nixon. Her speech on the Constitution, justice, and moral responsibility was broadcast live and captivated the nation. It not only solidified her legacy as a defender of democratic ideals, but also positioned her as a symbol of principled leadership during a time of national crisis. Though her public service was rooted in constitutional law and civil rights, Barbara's private life was just as quietly revolutionary. For over 2 decades, she shared her life with Nancy Earle, an educational psychologist. While Jordan never publicly labeled her sexuality, likely due to the political risks of being an openly lesbian black woman in the 1970s and 1980s, their long-term relationship was well known among close friends and colleagues. In an era where LGBTQ+ public figures were often forced to live in secrecy, Barbara's quiet authenticity defied the norms without ever making headlines. While Jordan did not die from HIV/AIDS, her advocacy for healthcare reform and social equity placed her in solidarity with many suffering during the epidemic. She championed the rights of the disadvantaged, those left behind by unjust systems, including people living with chronic illness and social stigma. Her role on the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform and her lectures as a professor at the University of Texas further showed her enduring commitment to justice. In her later years, Barbara's health declined. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and later suffered from leukemia. Despite her declining mobility and repeated hospitalizations, she remained a visible public servant and continued to teach until her passing on January 17, 1996, at the age of 59. Barbara Jordan's significance extends far beyond her legislative achievements. She shattered glass ceilings, challenged racist and sexist assumptions, and redefined what leadership could look like for black women, especially in spaces historically dominated by white men. Her relationship with Nancy Earle added a quietly powerful dimension to her legacy, one of love, loyalty, and quiet defiance. In remembering Barbara Jordan, we honor not just a stateswoman, but a trailblazer who, without ever needing to declare her identity publicly, lived her truth with grace and dignity. Her life reminds us that representation is not always about visibility. It's also about impact, presence, and the power to shape history from both the podium and the heart. Lorraine Hansberry. Lorraine Hansberry's life was as revolutionary as the characters she brought to life on the stage. Born on May 19, 1930 in Chicago, Illinois, she emerged as one of the most daring literary voices of the mid-20th century. Her greatest triumph came in 1959 with the debut of A Raisin in the Sun, the first Broadway play written by a black woman and the first to center a black American family's everyday fight for dignity. At just 29, she became a cultural lightning rod, brilliant, unapologetic, and far ahead of her time. Behind the acclaim and applause, Lorraine was navigating an inner world rarely shared with the public. A graduate of the University of Wisconsin and an intellectual shaped by radical politics, Hansberry was also a lesbian, a fact she never openly acknowledged in her lifetime, but which was revealed through private letters and journal entries published posthumously. She wrote candidly, often under pseudonyms for The Ladder, a publication of the Daughters of Bilitis, the first lesbian civil rights organization in the U.S. Her contributions addressed sexism, isolation, and the psychological toll of being queer in a deeply intolerant society. Lorraine's sexual identity was inseparable from her activism, while her marriage to Robert Nemiroff, a Jewish songwriter and political ally, remained publicly intact. Hansberry wrestled with her truth in private. She used her art to subtly challenge norms about gender roles, family structure, and love. Her unpublished works, plays, essays, and poems reveal the anguish and brilliance of a woman torn between public expectation and personal liberation. While Hansberry did not contract or die from HIV/AIDS, she succumbed to pancreatic cancer in 1965 at the young age of 34. Her early death robbed the world of a voice that might have shaped the social movements of the 1970s and 80s. Her queer identity, hidden by necessity, speaks to the silences imposed on Black lesbians long before the AIDS epidemic. Yet her work became foundational for Black feminist and LGBTQ+ thinkers who followed, including Audre Lorde and Alice Walker. Lorraine Hansberry's legacy is not confined to theater. Her life and works have been reclaimed as vital chapters in Black queer history. The 2018 documentary Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart helped bring her full story into the light, including her same-sex writings and relationships that had long been omitted from mainstream biographies. Though she never lived through the AIDS crisis, her emotional and intellectual blueprint became a resource for those facing it. She taught us that art is resistance, that silence is a form of death, and that identity, even when suppressed, finds its way to the surface. Today, Lorraine Hansberry is remembered not only as a literary genius, but as a quiet pioneer who dared to write truth into the American narrative, layered, complex, and undeniably queer. Her influence endures wherever Black women create, wherever stories of identity and struggle are told, and wherever courage dares to confront the impossible. Prudence Nobantu Mabel. Prudence Nobantu Mabele was more than an activist. She was a defiant symbol of truth in a world steeped in denial. Born in South Africa in 1971, she grew up during apartheid, a time when Black lives were routinely devalued and women's voices were often drowned out by systemic oppression. Despite this, Prudence rose with unshakable determination, eventually becoming one of the most courageous figures in South Africa's fight against HIV/AIDS and gender inequality. In 1992, at just 21 years old, Prudence made history by becoming the first Black South African woman to publicly announce that she was HIV positive. Her decision was nothing short of revolutionary. At the time, the disease was surrounded by fear, misinformation, and cruel stigmatization, especially in communities already marginalized by poverty and institutional neglect. By speaking openly, she shattered a cultural silence that had cost countless lives and isolated those who were suffering in the shadows. What set Prudence apart was not only her honesty, but also her relentless advocacy. She co-founded the Positive Women's Network, a support organization that offered education, community, and resources to women living with HIV. In doing so, she helped redefine what it meant to live with the virus, not as a victim, but as a warrior. She challenged both government complacency and societal shame, proving that living with HIV did not mean the end of one's contribution to the world. As a proud lesbian, Prudence's identity placed her at the intersection of multiple struggles: race, gender, sexuality, and illness. Her activism consistently highlighted the unique challenges faced by Black queer women, particularly when accessing healthcare or fighting for social visibility. She became a tireless voice for LGBTQ+ inclusion in the broader HIV/AIDS conversation, demanding that all affected communities, not just the most visible, be given equal attention and resources. Though she lived with HIV for over 2 decades, Prudence remained active until her final days. Her death in 2017, caused by pneumonia complications, was a devastating loss not only to South Africa, but to the global health equity movement. Yet her legacy lives on in the women she empowered, the systems she challenged, and the stigma she refused to accept. Prudence did not hide her scars. She wore them as proof of survival. She marched, spoke organized, and comforted countless women who might have otherwise suffered in silence. Her life embodied the radical idea that truth, even painful truth, is the first step toward healing. In honoring Prudence Nobantu Mabele, we remember a woman who transformed her diagnosis into a declaration that every life has value, that every voice matters, and that no one should be forced to hide who they are or what they face. She may be gone, but the echoes of her defiance continue to ripple through generations, lighting the way for those still fighting to be seen. Gugu Dlamini. Gugulethu Gugu Dlamini was born in 1958 in the township of Kwamashu near Durban, South Africa. She lived in a society burdened by fear and silence, especially around HIV/AIDS. Yet when stigma demanded quiet compliance, Gugu spoke her truth. In December 1998, she marched in public with a placard reading, "I am HIV positive," detonating a powerful wave of shock and courage in a nation still struggling to acknowledge the epidemic's devastation. Her decision to disclose her status was not born from self-pity, but from an urgent desire to educate and humanize. Gugu believed that visibility could shatter fear, and she offered herself as living proof that people with HIV deserved dignity, not blame. More than a personal confession, it was a public statement of solidarity with thousands suffering in the shadows. But when she stepped forward, the backlash was immediate. Rather than empathy, she was met with hostility in her own community. Her declaration led to vicious harassment. Neighbors spat upon her food was dumped outside her home, and threats followed tirelessly. Within days, she disappeared. On December 28th, she was brutally attacked at home and found dead the next morning, beaten and strangled by people she once trusted. Gugu's death struck a chord across South Africa and around the world. She became a martyr, not in the sense of grandeur, but as someone murdered for refusing to conceal a medical diagnosis. Her life and the way it ended galvanized global outrage against stigma and shame. Memorials erupted, candlelit vigils were held, and urgent conversations about HIV prevention, treatment, and compassion finally broke through the long-standing silence. Though her time was tragically short, Gugu's impact endures. Her public statement sparked policy reckonings, healing initiatives, and a reassessment of how communities, especially in Africa, treated people living with HIV. Today, her legacy lives on in the women who stand openly, the activists who demand justice, and the global health workers who treat HIV with empathy instead of fear. As a Black lesbian woman, Gugu occupied a space where multiple forms of marginalization overlapped. Though her sexuality was seldom discussed publicly at the time, contemporaries recognized that her intersectional identity intensified the dangers she faced. Her bravery did more than expose a virus, it revealed the deep roots of prejudice that punished those already marginalized for demanding visibility. Gugu Dlamini's life reminds us that activism can come from the most vulnerable among us, and that truth, when spoken against all odds, can catalyze change. She did not hesitate. With her death, she handed the world a question: can societies confront their fears with compassion? In refusing to be silent, she became the voice for many who could not speak. If part 1 of this series is a remembrance, then Gugu's narrative stands at its heart. Her tragic end forces us to ask how many others have remained invisible because courage was criminalized. As we move forward, may her memory continue to challenge stigma, demand empathy, and inspire generations to come. Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was a revolutionary force who turned hardship into activism and invisibility into legacy. Born on August 24, 1945 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, she moved to New York City in her teens with just a few dollars and a suitcase full of dreams. Assigned male at birth and identifying later as a transgender woman, Marsha lived authentically in a world that refused to accept people like her. Her middle initial, P, famously stood for "pay it no mind," a phrase she used to brush off questions about her gender. Known for her flamboyant outfits, flower crowns, and radiant smile, Marsha became a fixture in Greenwich Village and a beloved figure in the LGBTQ+ community. But her contributions were far greater than her vibrant presence. She was one of the first to resist police during the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, a pivotal moment that ignited the modern gay rights movement. Her resistance wasn't planned. It was instinctive, born from years of systemic violence, homelessness, and marginalization. Together with fellow activist Sylvia Rivera Marsha co-founded Star Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, a groundbreaking organization that provided housing and support for transgender youth and sex workers cast aside by mainstream society. They funded the group through sex work and relied on each other's strength when the rest of the world turned its back. Marsha's later years were marked by her deepening involvement in HIV/AIDS activism. As the disease ravaged the LGBTQ+ community in the 1980s and early 90s, Marsha became a vocal advocate for those living with HIV. She marched with ACT UP, attended rallies, and visited patients who had been abandoned by their families. Her compassion was not performative, it was lived. She knew suffering personally and stood beside others in theirs. While there is no definitive evidence that Marsha died from HIV/AIDS, she stood with those who did. She humanized the epidemic long before governments or media gave it proper attention. Her empathy extended beyond labels, reaching people left behind in alleyways, hospital rooms, and jail cells. In 1992, Marsha's body was discovered in the Hudson River. Police quickly ruled her death a suicide, but friends and activists have long insisted it was murder. The circumstances remain suspicious, and investigations have since been reopened. Regardless of the official verdict, what is undeniable is that Marsha's death reflects the violence and neglect faced by Black trans women every day. Her legacy lives on through murals, documentaries, pride parades, and activism that still bears her name. Marsha P. Johnson was not just a transgender icon, she was a radical nurturer, a freedom fighter, and a saint for the forgotten. She gave dignity to the discarded and made space for those who didn't fit anywhere else. In honoring her, we acknowledge a painful truth that many who dared to live out loud paid the ultimate price. Marsha's name remains a rallying cry, not just for remembrance, but for justice, visibility, and love without conditions. Beverly Smith. Beverly Smith was a fierce intellectual, a powerful writer, and a committed activist whose work reshaped feminist and LGBTQ+ thought in the United States. Born in the 1940s, Smith emerged as a critical voice during the second wave of feminism, a time when Black women and lesbians were often pushed to the margins of both civil rights and feminist movements. Rather than accept erasure, she built a new framework, one that embraced every part of her identity and demanded space for others like her. She was best known as one of the principal authors of the Combahee River Collective Statement, a groundbreaking 1977 manifesto that introduced the term identity politics and laid the foundation for intersectional activism. Smith and her collaborators argued that the liberation of Black women, particularly queer Black women, was essential to the liberation of all people. For the first time in public feminist discourse, Black lesbians were not an afterthought. They were central. Beverly's work, centered on creating platforms for the voices mainstream movements refused to hear. She co-founded the Kitchen Table Women of Color Press, an independent publishing house dedicated to the works of women of color, alongside other legends like Audre Lorde and Barbara Smith, her twin sister. This press became one of the only places where queer Black women's stories were prioritized and preserved. Smith's influence extended into health advocacy as well. As a public health professional and former nurse, she was among the first to spotlight how systemic racism and sexism impacted medical care for Black women, especially lesbians. During the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 1980s and 1990s, she became a voice of reason and urgency, pushing for inclusive education, accessible health care, and support services for queer women living with HIV, a group too often excluded from the dominant narrative. Although Beverly Smith herself did not contract HIV, her solidarity with those who did, particularly Black lesbians, navigating both illness and invisibility, was unwavering. She spoke at conferences, wrote essays, and mentored younger activists, always reinforcing the truth that liberation must be inclusive, or it isn't liberation at all. Beverly passed away in 2008 after a long battle with cancer. Her death was a great loss to the worlds of activism, academia, and LGBTQ+ history. Yet she left behind a blueprint, one that fused race, gender, sexuality, and class into a unified lens for justice. Her work laid the intellectual and emotional groundwork for future generations of queer Black thinkers, writers, and organizers. Beverly Smith's life was a testament to what happens when one refuses to be divided by the world's categories. She lived wholly and unapologetically holding space for others to do the same. In honoring her today, we don't just remember a leader, we carry forward her vision of an inclusive, radical, and compassionate future where every identity matters and no one is left behind. Octavia Butler. Octavia Estelle Butler was a literary trailblazer whose visionary storytelling reshaped the landscape of science fiction. Born on June 22, 1947 in Pasadena, California, she was raised in a working-class household by her widowed mother. A shy and introspective child, Butler found refuge in books, and by her early teens, she was crafting stories that dared to imagine futures radically different from the present. At a time when science fiction was overwhelmingly white and male, Butler broke through every convention. She was the first African-American woman to gain major recognition in the genre, winning multiple Hugo and Nebula Awards throughout her career. Her breakthrough novel, Kindred 1979, merged time travel with historical trauma, exploring slavery through the lens of speculative fiction. With Parable of the Sower Dawn and Wild Seed, she constructed narratives where themes of race, power, gender, and survival collided in startling ways. Though Butler never publicly defined her sexuality, her work consistently challenged heteronormative thinking. Her characters defied binaries, gendered, racial, and moral, and existed in worlds where identity was fluid, complex, and deeply connected to social transformation. In this way, her writing became a quiet revolution for queer readers, particularly Black LGBTQ+ individuals who saw themselves reflected in her speculative universes, even when they were erased from real-world narratives. Butler's work was not only artistic, but deeply political. She understood the intersections of race, class, gender, and identity long before terms like intersectionality became widespread. She imagined societies where traditional hierarchies crumbled and in their place, complex communities struggled to rebuild with justice, empathy, and cooperation. Her protagonists were often women of color, navigating brutal worlds with emotional depth and strategic brilliance. Through them, Butler explored the price of transformation and the courage required to evolve. Although she did not die from HIV/AIDS, Butler's legacy is profoundly connected to the cultural and political conversations the epidemic raised. In the 1980s and 1990s, when silence around the disease was deafening, especially for Black women and queer communities, Butler's work continued to explore systemic neglect, biological threat, and social resistance. Her narratives reflected the fear and resilience of those living through crises, and her voice echoed the cries for dignity, healthcare access, and recognition. Octavia Butler passed away unexpectedly on February 24, 2006, at the age of 58, due to a stroke. Her death marked the loss of a singular mind, but her influence has only grown in the years since. Today, she is celebrated not only as a master of science fiction, but as a prophet whose visions warned us, taught us, and urged us to imagine better worlds. Butler's legacy continues through new generations of queer and Black writers who follow the path she carved. She made it possible to dream beyond the boundaries imposed by race, gender, and disease, and in doing so, she gave permission for marginalized voices to shape the future. D.D. Chamblee. D.D. Chamblee was a tireless force in the fight for human rights, equality, and dignity, especially for Black transgender women sex workers and people living with HIV/AIDS. As a Black trans woman who lived openly and courageously, she challenged societal norms and confronted the very systems that sought to silence her existence. Her work as an activist, mentor, and organizer made her a pillar in the ongoing battle against stigma and discrimination. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, Chamblee experienced firsthand the marginalization that came with being both Black and transgender in the American South. Her life was not easy. She faced rejection, homelessness, and the violence that disproportionately affects transgender women of color. But rather than allowing these challenges to defeat her, she transformed her pain into purpose. From personal adversity, she built platforms of hope, education, and empowerment. In response to the overwhelming neglect faced by transgender individuals during the height of the AIDS epidemic, Chamblee founded Legender Inc., a nonprofit organization committed to serving transgender people, especially those who were formerly incarcerated, involved in sex work, or living with HIV. Through this platform, she offered not only HIV testing and education, but also critical housing assistance mentorship and emotional support. She emphasized that people living with HIV deserved compassion resources and a chance to live full lives, not judgment or exclusion. Chamblee was known for her fearless advocacy in public spaces, demanding justice in policy meetings, government hearings, and academic panels. She spoke truth to power, often being the only transgender person in the room, determined to make sure her community was represented. She refused to let anyone forget the names and lives of trans women who had died from violence or systemic neglect, including those who perished due to the compounded impact of HIV and poverty. Though Dee Dee Chamblee did not pass away directly from HIV/AIDS, her life and activism were deeply entwined with the epidemic's impact on Black LGBTQ+ communities. She stood beside those dying in silence, gave voice to those who were ignored, and educated countless others on prevention treatment and the power of community healing. She didn't just fight the virus. She fought the systems of oppression that allowed it to devastate the most vulnerable. Chamblee passed away in 2013, leaving behind a legacy far larger than her own name. Her death marked the end of a remarkable journey, but her life's work continues through the programs she built and the people she empowered. To this day, Legender Inc. stands as a symbol of what one woman's courage can create, an institution born from empathy, serving the very souls society forgets. Dee Dee Chamblee's story is not only about survival, but about unwavering commitment to transformation. She taught us that advocacy begins with love for oneself and for a community that refuses to disappear. Her memory lives on in the hearts of those still fighting for freedom, dignity, and a world without shame. Joseph Beam. Joseph Beam was a groundbreaking writer, editor, and activist who gave voice to an entire generation of Black queer people living under the shadow of silence. Born in Philadelphia in 1954, Beam was a gifted thinker from a young age. He attended Franklin and Marshall College, where he studied English and political science. But it wasn't until the 1980s, at the height of both the gay liberation movement and the AIDS crisis, that his writing would begin to reshape the Black LGBTQ+ literary landscape forever. Beam understood a painful truth. The lives, loves, and losses of Black gay men were being erased. Mainstream gay culture, dominated by white narratives, ignored them. The Black civil rights movement often refused to acknowledge them. And when HIV/AIDS emerged as a deadly epidemic, their deaths were not just ignored, they were stigmatized and blamed. In response, Beam edited the seminal anthology In the Life, a Black gay anthology published in 1986. The book was the first of its kind, an unapologetic, emotionally raw collection of essays, stories, and poems by and about Black gay men. It gave visibility to those who had been silenced by racism, homophobia, and shame. Beam's introduction to the anthology remains one of the most powerful declarations in queer literature. He wrote, "Black men loving Black men is the revolutionary act of the 1980s." His words were not just literature, they were lifelines. Beam believed that writing was a form of survival. Through literature, he connected Black queer men across time, geography, and trauma. He offered them community identity and the radical reminder that their lives mattered. But Beam's activism extended beyond the page. He was a fierce advocate for HIV/AIDS awareness within the Black community. At a time when the virus was still heavily misunderstood, Beam called out the silence surrounding Black queer death and demanded accountability. He urged people to see beyond the statistics, to recognize the individual humanity of those living and dying with AIDS. Joseph Beam's own life was tragically cut short. He died in 1988 at just 33 years old from complications related to AIDS. His passing devastated the small but growing circle of black queer writers. However, he was not forgotten. His close friend and fellow writer Essex Hemphill, along with Beam's mother, completed and posthumously published his second book, Brother to Brother: New Writings by Black Gay Men, in 1991. The title itself symbolized a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. Joseph Beam didn't just create literature, he created space. He cracked open a door that had long been locked, and through it, generations of black LGBTQ+ writers and thinkers have walked. His legacy is not merely in his words, but in the community that still gathers around them. Even in death, Joseph Beam's voice continues to echo, insisting on truth, on presence, and on love that refuses to be erased. Melvin Dixon. Melvin Dixon was a brilliant novelist, poet, and academic whose work gave a poignant and lyrical voice to the black gay experience in America. Born on May 29, 1950 in Stamford, Connecticut, Dixon grew up during a time when both his blackness and his queerness were identities considered dangerous to declare. But instead of retreating into silence, he turned those intersecting truths into a wellspring of deeply personal and politically charged art. Educated at Wesleyan University and later Harvard, where he earned a PhD in English, Dixon pursued a dual life as both scholar and storyteller. He became a professor of literature at Queens College in New York, where he taught African American and gay literature. In the classroom, he offered students narratives that many had never seen reflected in academic spaces. But it was through his writing that Dixon reached the broader world with rare beauty and honesty. Dixon's novels, especially Vanishing Rooms and Trouble the Water, dealt unflinchingly with themes of identity, intimacy, and isolation. His protagonists, black gay men navigating racism, rejection, and desire, were not caricatures or cautionary tales, but fully realized people, flawed and vulnerable, resilient and aching. Through these characters, Dixon revealed the emotional and spiritual toll of living in a world that often treated them as invisible or disposable. His poetry collections, such as Change of Territory, reflected his lyrical gifts and his deep sense of cultural memory. Many of his poems mourned lost love, community trauma, and the everyday quiet of lives marked by struggle. But even amid sorrow, his work often pulsed with hope, a hope rooted in love, language, and the power of bearing witness. By the late 1980s, as the AIDS epidemic devastated the LGBTQ+ community, Dixon's work became even more urgent. He wrote with stark clarity about illness, caretaking, and impending loss. In one of his most cited public speeches delivered in 1992, shortly before his death, Dixon asked a haunting question: what's the responsibility of the black gay writer during this time of crisis? His answer was clear: to record, to reflect, to resist being forgotten. Melvin Dixon died on October 26, 1992, at the age of 42 from complications related to AIDS. His passing was a devastating blow to both the literary world and the black LGBTQ+ community. Yet he died as he had lived, honestly, courageously, and with his pen still in motion. Though Dixon did not receive mainstream literary fame in his lifetime, his influence has grown steadily in the years since. Scholars, poets, and novelists now regard him as a foundational figure in queer black literature, someone who chronicled an era with elegance, empathy, and fire. In remembering Melvin Dixon, we don't just revisit the pain of a life cut short. We celebrate a voice that sang for all those who were told to stay silent. His words remain reminding us of the beauty, complexity, and necessity of telling our truths, especially in the face of death. Rudy Lewis. Rudy Lewis was a voice that could stop time. As one of the lead vocalists of the iconic R&B group The Drifters, his smooth tenor helped shape the sound of early 1960s soul. Born on August 23, 1936 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Lewis grew up with a gospel background, singing in church and later becoming a soloist with the Clara Ward Singers. His early years were marked by promise, but also by a deeply internalized struggle, one he never publicly spoke about in his lifetime. In 1960, Rudy was chosen to replace the legendary Ben E. King as the lead singer of The Drifters. It was no easy task following in the footsteps of a rising star, but Lewis didn't just fill the role, he redefined it. His vocal contributions to hits like Some Kind of Wonderful, Up on the Roof, and On Broadway helped cement the Drifters as one of the most beloved vocal groups of the era. His voice was simultaneously warm and aching, filled with a depth that resonated with millions. Behind the scenes, however, Rudy Lewis lived with pain and secrecy. During a time when homosexuality was heavily stigmatized, especially in the music industry, Lewis is believed to have been a closeted gay man. The weight of that secrecy, combined with the pressure of fame and personal demons, reportedly led him to struggle with drug use and emotional turmoil. Being both black and queer in the 1960s was isolating, and Lewis had few public outlets or safe spaces to express his true self. On May 20th, 1964, just one day before the Drifters were scheduled to record Under the Boardwalk, Rudy Lewis was found dead in his hotel room at the age of 27. The official cause of death was listed as a probable drug overdose, though some speculated suicide or even foul play. What made his death even more tragic was how quietly it was handled. The band recorded the hit single the very next day with a different lead singer, and the industry quickly moved on. Although Lewis died more than a decade before the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, his story is closely tied to the cultural forces that later shaped the crisis. He represents the generations of black queer performers who were forced to hide, denied the space to live openly, and discarded too quickly when tragedy struck. His name, while lesser known today, belongs in the conversation about the erasure of black LGBTQ+ contributions in mainstream American music. Rudy Lewis was more than a voice in the background. He was a soul who carried joy and pain in every note he sang. His short life and sudden death are reminders of how many stories remain untold, particularly those involving sexuality, race, and silence. To remember Rudy is to reclaim a legacy that was never allowed to fully shine in its time. Gladys Bentley. Gladys Bentley was a musical powerhouse and unapologetic trailblazer who redefined gender sexuality and performance during one of the most culturally vibrant periods in American history. Born on August 12, 1907 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Bentley was a child prodigy with a natural gift for music. But her journey would be far more radical than simply hitting the right notes. She would become one of the first black women in the entertainment world to live publicly as a lesbian during an era when doing so was considered not only scandalous, but criminal. By her early 20s, Bentley had relocated to New York City, where she quickly became a headline act in the speakeasies of Harlem. At the peak of the Harlem Renaissance, she performed regularly at venues like the Clam House and the Ubangi Club. Her voice, a deep, resonant contralto, was magnetic, drawing crowds of both black and white patrons, including celebrities, poets, and politicians. But it wasn't just her voice that captivated audiences. Gladys Bentley took the stage dressed in a tuxedo and top hat, exuding masculine swagger and confidence. She played piano with fire and flair while singing risque blues numbers that she often reworded to include lesbian themes. Her presence was revolutionary. Here was a masculine-presenting black woman boldly expressing same-sex desire in public decades before LGBTQ+ rights would enter mainstream discourse. Her lifestyle challenged nearly every societal expectation. In interviews and public appearances, she spoke openly about her attraction to women and even claimed to have married a white woman in an unofficial ceremony. She didn't just break rules, she rewrote them. However, with the end of the Harlem Renaissance and the tightening grip of McCarthy-era conservatism, Bentley's visibility came at a cost. In the 1950s, as pressures mounted against anyone perceived as deviant, she faced increasing scrutiny. In a desperate attempt to conform, she claimed to have been cured of her homosexuality through hormone therapy and even sought to remold her public image to fit societal expectations. This period of retraction was deeply painful and symbolic of the intense cultural pressure to suppress queer identity during mid-20th century America. Bentley continued to perform, though never with the same fame or freedom she had once enjoyed. She died of pneumonia on January 18, 1960, at the age of 52. Her passing occurred before the HIV/AIDS epidemic emerged, but her role as one of the earliest and most visible Black lesbian entertainers created a cultural foundation for those who would later fight both the virus and the shame surrounding it. Today, Gladys Bentley's life is celebrated as a testament to queer Black resilience. She sang loudly when the world asked for silence. She lived boldly when the world demanded shame. And though she paid a price for her courage, her legacy remains untouchable, a symbol of what it means to be unapologetically true in a world that isn't ready. Venus Extravaganza. Venus Extravaganza was more than just a name whispered on the runway. She was a dreamer, a trailblazer, and a symbol of both beauty and vulnerability within the underground ballroom scene of 1980s New York. Born in Jersey City, New Jersey in 1965, Venus was a transgender woman of Puerto Rican and Italian descent. Though she lived in a society that often treated trans women, especially trans women of color, as disposable, she believed in the possibility of glamour transformation and a world where she could simply be herself. Venus found her chosen family in the ballroom scene, an underground subculture built by Black and Latinx LGBTQ+ communities. This world offered something the outside world refused: acceptance, freedom, and chosen kinship. Venus joined the House of Extravaganza, one of the most legendary ballroom houses, and quickly became known for her charisma, elegance, and soft femininity. She competed in realness categories, celebrating how convincingly one could present a mainstream identity, often embodying a dream of white upper-class womanhood that was unattainable in her day-to-day life. She rose to national recognition posthumously through the 1990 documentary Paris is Burning, which was filmed in the years leading up to her tragic death. In the film, Venus is seen speaking candidly about her aspirations to be a model, to marry a wealthy man, and to live a life filled with luxury and love. Yet beneath her hopefulness was an undercurrent of pain and fear. She spoke openly about the dangers trans women face, particularly when engaging in sex work, a reality for many trans women who were shut out of traditional employment. In December 1988, Venus's life came to a heartbreaking end. Her body was discovered strangled and hidden under a hotel bed in a Manhattan motel room. She was just 23 years old. The circumstances of her death remain unsolved to this day, a chilling reminder of the violence and erasure faced by trans women of color in America. Venus Extravaganza did not die of HIV/AIDS, but her life and death are intrinsically tied to the same systemic forces that allowed the epidemic to flourish unchecked in the LGBTQ+ community: stigma, neglect, and societal indifference. Trans women, particularly Black and Latinx, were disproportionately affected by both the violence of the streets and the silence surrounding the health crisis. Despite her short life, Venus left an enduring impact. She became an icon not because she was perfect or powerful, but because she was unapologetically human. Her presence in Paris is Burning continues to educate new generations about the ballroom scene, gender identity, and the personal cost of being visible in a hostile world. Venus dreamed of a life filled with light, love, and legitimacy. Though the world denied her that dream, her memory endures in the culture she helped build and in the countless lives she continues to inspire. Her story is a reminder that even in tragedy, beauty can spark revolution. E. Lynn Harris. E. Lynn Harris was a literary pioneer who made the invisible visible. Born on June 20, 1955 in Flint, Michigan, and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas, Harris would go on to become one of the first openly gay Black male authors to achieve mainstream success in America. His fiction gave voice to the joys, struggles, and emotional complexity of Black gay and bisexual men's stories that had been almost entirely absent from American bookshelves. Before he became a best-selling author, Harris was a successful computer salesman. But writing was his passion, and in the early 1990s, he began to self-publish his first novel, Invisible Life. The book told the story of Raymond Tyler, a Black man grappling with his sexuality, romantic entanglements, and societal expectations. Harris sold copies from the trunk of his car, gaining momentum through word of mouth until the novel was picked up by a major publisher. It became a groundbreaking success. Harris followed with a string of best-selling novels including Just As I Am, This Too Shall Pass, and If This World Were Mine, which explored themes of love, betrayal, faith, masculinity, and identity within the Black community. What made his work truly revolutionary was its honesty. In a world that often demanded silence from Black LGBTQ+ people, Harris dared to center their humanity. His characters weren't caricatures or comic relief. They were athletes, businessmen, artists, and lovers. Through them, Harris tackled homophobia, the fear of coming-out family tension, and the devastating impact of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. His books frequently included characters navigating life with HIV, offering a compassionate and nuanced portrayal that challenged both societal stigma and internalized shame. Though Harris himself was HIV negative, he was deeply connected to those affected by the epidemic. He lost friends to the virus and used his platform to raise awareness about the need for testing honesty in relationships and compassionate care. His novels served as lifelines for many readers who saw themselves reflected for the first time in mainstream media. In barbershops, beauty salons, and church pews, his stories sparked difficult but necessary conversations. Harris also served as a mentor championing emerging Black LGBTQ+ writers and encouraging them to tell their truths without fear. He taught creative writing at the University of Arkansas and never shied away from the responsibility that came with his success. Tragically, E. Lynn Harris passed away on July 23, 2009, at the age of 54 from a heart attack while on a book tour. His sudden death shocked fans across the country, especially those who had grown up reading his books in secret, clinging to the hope they offered. Though he is no longer with us, E. Lynn Harris's legacy lives on. He opened the door for queer Black literature to thrive and taught a generation that love, no matter how complicated, is always worth writing about. In doing so, he didn't just tell stories. He built bridges, healed wounds, and gave countless readers the courage to live out loud. Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was a towering figure in American civil rights history, yet his name is often left out of history books. Born on March 17, 1912 in Westchester, Pennsylvania, Rustin was a brilliant organizer, pacifist, and visionary whose strategic mind helped shape the 1960s movement for racial equality. But he was also a gay Black man, living in a time when both of those identities made him a target for scrutiny, exclusion, and silence, even within the movements he helped lead. Rustin's activism began long before Martin Luther King Jr. rose to prominence. He worked with labor unions, was jailed for refusing military service during World War II, and was deeply influenced by the nonviolent teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. These philosophies would later become central to Dr. King's approach, an approach Rustin introduced and helped refine. Most notably, Rustin was the chief architect behind the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. The event was one of the largest political rallies in U.S. history and a defining moment in the fight for civil rights. Rustin's logistical brilliance made it possible, yet he remained largely invisible to the public eye because of who he loved. Throughout his life, Rustin was openly gay, an identity that caused friction with both white liberals and Black civil rights leaders. In 1953, he was arrested on a morals charge related to consensual homosexual activity, which opponents used to undermine his credibility. Even within King's inner circle, Rustin's sexuality was seen as a political liability. He was often forced to step back, relinquish credit, or operate from behind the scenes to protect the broader movement from scandal. Despite this marginalization, Rustin never stopped working for justice. In the 1980s, he turned his focus to LGBTQ+ rights and advocated fiercely for the rights of gay men, especially as the AIDS crisis began ravaging communities across the country. While he was not infected with the virus, he understood the importance of fighting both the disease and the stigma it carried. He supported groups offering services to people living with HIV/AIDS and urged Black communities to confront the epidemic with compassion rather than shame. Rustin died on August 24, 1987, at the age of 75 from a ruptured appendix. At the time of his death, he was partnered with Walter Nagel, who later became the executor of his estate and the guardian of his legacy. In the decades since, Rustin's contributions have slowly gained the recognition they deserve. In 2013, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Bayard Rustin's life is a profound reminder that history often celebrates voices it once tried to silence. He taught the world how to organize, how to resist, and perhaps most bravely, how to live authentically in the face of erasure. His legacy is not just in marches or speeches, but in every intersectional movement that now dares to be seen and heard. Amber Rose. Amber Rose is a cultural figure who has built her platform on transparency, boldness, and self-love. Born on October 21, 1983 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, she is of Cape Verdean and Irish descent and has become one of the most outspoken advocates for sexual freedom and LGBTQ+ acceptance in mainstream entertainment. Before fame. Amber worked as a model and dancer, gaining notoriety in the late 2000s after her high-profile relationship with rapper Kanye West brought her into the public eye. Her buzz-cut blonde hair, striking features, and unapologetic confidence helped her stand out, but it was her attitude toward identity and sexual expression that kept her in the spotlight. Amber Rose has consistently challenged traditional norms surrounding gender roles and sexuality. She has publicly discussed her attraction to both men and women and has never labeled herself strictly within the binaries of sexual orientation. While she doesn't identify as a lesbian, her openness about bisexual experiences and same-sex attraction has contributed to more honest and inclusive conversations about fluid sexuality in communities that often stigmatize such discussions. She gained further visibility through her brief marriage to rapper Wiz Khalifa, with whom she shares a son. But even as her romantic relationships were publicized, Amber maintained that love for her is based on emotional connection rather than gender. Her stance helped highlight the spectrum of sexual identity, especially for women of color, in an industry where such openness is often misunderstood or weaponized. One of Amber's most notable contributions to modern feminist and LGBTQ+ dialogue is the Slut Walk movement she revived in Los Angeles. Through this annual march and community event, Amber has spoken out against slut-shaming, sexual violence, homophobia, and body judgment. Her message has consistently been that no one should be judged for how they love, express themselves, or choose to live authentically. Amber's advocacy has also extended to participating in Pride events, where she has spoken directly to and for the LGBTQ+ community, reinforcing her support and standing in solidarity. Her frankness about exploring relationships across gender lines has resonated with young people navigating their own identities in a judgmental world. While she is not part of the list of Black lesbians who died of HIV/AIDS, Amber Rose's presence in your documentary-style narrative serves a different purpose as a symbol of living visibility. She represents a shift in public figures no longer hiding their complexity but embracing and discussing it out loud, even in the face of criticism. Amber Rose remains a dynamic force, part pop culture icon, part activist. She continues to use her platform to question outdated norms, encourage sexual health awareness, and normalize bisexual and pansexual identity across Black communities and beyond. In doing so, she has become a modern role model not for perfection, but for fearless self-expression. And that in itself is a form of cultural resistance that saves lives one honest conversation at a time. Amandla Stenberg. Amandla Stenberg is a bold and intelligent force who has redefined what it means to grow up in the public eye while embracing the complexities of race, gender, and sexuality. Born on October 23, 1998, in Los Angeles, California, Amandla rose to fame playing Rue in the Hunger Games at just 13 years old. But instead of remaining confined to Hollywood's traditional child star path, Amandla used their visibility to challenge norms and speak truth to power. With a South African father and African-American Danish mother, Amandla's multiracial identity has always been a central part of their narrative. But it is their fearlessness in discussing their queerness and gender fluidity that has made them a generational icon for young Black LGBTQ+ individuals. In 2018, Amandla came out as gay in an interview following a previous coming out as bisexual and later pansexual. They've also spoken openly about using both she, her, and they, them pronouns, allowing space for the fluidity that reflects their lived experience. Amandla has never waited for permission to be authentic. Whether it's sharing stories about same-gender attraction, their evolving identity, or speaking up for queer Black youth, they've always done so with intelligence, clarity, and grace. Their visibility has helped normalize conversations about queerness in spaces that often remain rigid or judgmental, particularly in Black and entertainment communities. One of Amandla's most impactful moments came during an interview with Wonderland magazine, in which they shared how falling in love with another woman helped them realize their gay identity. That vulnerability made headlines, but more importantly, it allowed young fans, many struggling with their own truths, to feel seen. Amandla doesn't just talk about queer identity. They embody it, celebrate it, and create space for others to exist without shame. Their work in The Hate U, give a film tackling police brutality and racial injustice, further proved their depth as an actor and activist. Off-screen, they use social media to speak about topics ranging from colorism and privilege to gender expression, and the importance of safe spaces for queer youth of color. Through both words and actions, Amandla makes it clear representation is not enough without authenticity and advocacy. Though not a lesbian who died of HIV/AIDS, Amandla's presence in this narrative serves as a powerful contrast. They are part of a new generation of Black queer figures living openly, pushing back against the erasure that defined previous decades when many like those highlighted in this video could not speak their truths safely. Amandla Steenberg is not just a performer or activist. They are a reflection of what's possible when visibility is met with purpose. Their life stands as a living legacy to those who never got the chance to be fully seen. And in doing so, Amandla offers hope to a new era, one defined not by silence, but by power, pride, and truth. Janelle Monáe. Janelle Monáe is a genre-defying artist, a masterful storyteller, and a fearless advocate for queer Black identity. Born on December 1, 1985 in Kansas City, Kansas, Monáe rose to fame not just for her eclectic musical style, but for her ability to fuse art with activism, futurism with freedom. From the start of her career, Monáe stood apart, a woman in tailored suits singing about androids and autonomy, inviting her listeners to imagine a world unconstrained by society's rules. Though originally known for her robotic alter ego and Afro-futurist concept albums like The Arch-Android and Metropolis, Janelle Monáe's public evolution into an outspoken queer icon marked a turning point in both her art and her advocacy. In 2018, she came out as pansexual in a landmark Rolling Stone interview, explaining that she is attracted to people regardless of gender. Later, she expanded on that identity by embracing non-binary language and has since shared that she uses both she, her, and they, them pronouns. Her music reflects this journey with striking clarity. The 2018 album Dirty Computer is both a sonic rebellion and a celebration of Black queer love, featuring songs like Make Me Feel Pink and Django Jane, each layered with political defiance, sensuality, and pride. The accompanying visual album was a cinematic experience filled with imagery that celebrated gender fluidity, same-sex intimacy, and resistance to conformity. Offstage, Monáe has used her platform to advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, particularly the experiences of queer Black women and non-binary people. She's spoken out about the pressures of erasure, the dangers of rigid gender norms, and the importance of honoring those in the queer community who paved the way, many of whom suffered and died during the HIV/AIDS crisis. Though she did not live through that era firsthand, Her art and voice help carry forward the memory and message of those who did. Her relationship with actress Tessa Thompson, though never officially confirmed, sparked wide conversation and curiosity about queer black love in Hollywood. Whether through collaboration or companionship, the two have become symbolic of a more open, expressive era of black queer visibility, one where stories of same-gender love are told not through tragedy, but empowerment. Though Janelle Monáe is not a lesbian who died of HIV/AIDS, her work is intricately linked to that legacy. She honors it by continuing the fight for visibility, love, and justice. She sings and speaks for those who could not, and in doing so, becomes part of a continuum of resistance and resilience. In a world where many still face danger for simply being who they are, Janelle Monáe offers a vision of unapologetic joy and boundless identity. Her voice is not only art, it is refuge, revolution, and remembrance. And in that, she honors every life lost to silence, shame, and stigma by choosing to be seen loud and shining. Sylvester James Jr. Known simply as Sylvester, was more than just a disco star. He was a trailblazing icon who shattered gender boundaries, celebrated queer love through music, and lived his truth during a time when doing so came at a high cost. Born on September 6, 1947 in Los Angeles, California, Sylvester grew up singing gospel music in Pentecostal churches, but was often ostracized for his flamboyance and queerness. Rather than diminish his light, he embraced it and turned it into a radiant force that would electrify dance floors across the world. By the mid-1970s, Sylvester had emerged as a standout artist in San Francisco's LGBTQ+ scene, eventually signing a record deal that brought him mainstream fame. His 1978 hit, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, wasn't just a disco anthem, it was a declaration. The song fused high-energy beats with unapologetically queer joy, and Sylvester's soaring falsetto became the voice of self-expression for many who felt unseen. With his sequins heels and gender-fluid style, Sylvester proudly defied expectations. He didn't ask for permission to be fabulous. He simply was. At a time when the music industry demanded conformity, Sylvester wore lipstick on magazine covers, used androgynous fashion, and openly spoke about being gay. He frequently appeared on television shows dressed in drag, bringing queer visibility into living rooms across America. As AIDS began to devastate the LGBTQ+ community in the early 1980s, Sylvester became one of the few high-profile entertainers to speak publicly about the epidemic. He was one of the earliest celebrities to address the stigma surrounding the disease, calling for compassion, awareness, and action. Though not an activist in the traditional sense, Sylvester used his platform to shine a light on a crisis that many were ignoring, and he did so with bravery, dignity, and love. In 1986, Sylvester was diagnosed with HIV. He kept performing as long as his body would allow, even as his health declined. His final public appearance was during San Francisco's 1988 Gay Freedom Parade, where he was wheeled in a chair, frail but smiling, draped in glamorous fabric and still adorned with glitter. His presence was defiant, courageous, and deeply symbolic. He was there not as a victim, but as a legend, refusing to disappear. Sylvester died on December 16, 1988, at just 41 years old from complications related to AIDS. True to his spirit, he left his royalties to AIDS-related charities, ensuring his legacy would continue to serve the community that embraced him. Sylvester's voice may have been silenced too soon, but his music and message live on. He was more than the queen of disco. He was a warrior for authenticity in an era of fear. Through sound, style, and sheer self-love, Sylvester taught the world that being real, mighty real, is the most powerful act of all. Willie Ninja. Willie Ninja was a cultural innovator, dance legend, and mentor who elevated ballroom culture into an international art form. Born on April 12, 1961 in New York City, he rose to prominence in the underground ballrooms of Harlem spaces created by Black and Latinx LGBTQ+ communities who built their own world when society shut them out. In that world, Willie Ninja became royalty. He was elegant, precise, and powerful. He didn't just dance, he vogued. With razor-sharp hand movements, fluid poses, and runway-ready grace, Ninja transformed the ballroom style of voguing into something stunningly technical, blending elements of martial arts, gymnastics, ballet, and high fashion. His performances were more than displays of talent, they were storytelling through motion filled with pride, defiance, and beauty. Ninja founded the House of Ninja in the 1980s, one of the most respected families in the ballroom scene. As a house mother, he provided guidance, discipline, and support to countless LGBTQ+ youth, many of whom had been rejected by their biological families. Willie wasn't just shaping dancers. He was saving lives, giving queer youth of color a place to belong, shine, and thrive. His international breakthrough came with the 1990 documentary Paris is Burning, where he mesmerized audiences with his commanding presence and insight. The film brought the underground ball scene to global attention, and Willie became a symbol of unapologetic black queer excellence. Suddenly, the world wanted to know what voguing was, and Willie Ninja was its greatest ambassador. But while mainstream success knocked at his door through collaborations with designers, music videos, and fashion houses, Willie never turned his back on the community that raised him. He continued to mentor, perform, and speak out, all while facing the same systemic barriers that plagued queer people of color: inadequate healthcare, housing, insecurity, and the ongoing crisis of HIV/AIDS. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the ballroom community was ravaged by AIDS. Willie was among those affected. He lived with HIV for years, continuing to perform and teach, even as his body weakened. Despite his diagnosis, he remained the heartbeat of the scene, always poised, always powerful. Willie Ninja passed away on September 2, 2006 at the age of 45 due to AIDS-related heart failure. His death left a deep void in the ballroom world, but his legacy has only grown stronger. Today, his name is spoken with reverence in dance studios, LGBTQ+ spaces, and fashion runways across the globe. Willie Ninja's story is one of resilience, brilliance, and love for movement, for community, and for self-expression without apology. He didn't just invent a dance style. He created a movement, inspired generations, and built a legacy that no virus or silence could ever erase. Assata Saint. Assata Saint was a fierce and unapologetic voice for black queer life during the height of the AIDS crisis. Born Yves Francois Lubin on October 2, 1957 in Les Cayes, Haiti, he immigrated to New York City at a young age and adopted the name Assata in honor of a ceremonial drum used in Haitian Vodou rituals, signaling his deep connection to ancestral roots, cultural resistance, and spiritual power. A poet, playwright, musician, and activist, Saint was a multidisciplinary force. He lived out loud during a time when silence often meant survival. His art was political, erotic, and spiritual, embodying the fullness of black gay identity in ways that challenged both white gay elitism and black conservatism. In a society determined to erase him, Assata Saint wrote himself and others like him into existence. Saint first found his creative footing in theater and poetry, but his influence expanded rapidly through the 1980s and early 90s. His works, such as Spells of a Voodoo Doll and The Impossible Beast, were searing lyrical manifestos about love, grief, racism, and the psychic wounds of being black and queer in America. He didn't hide behind metaphors. He named the disease, the bigotry, and the violence. He named desire, too, celebrating black queer sensuality with sacred boldness. He was also a powerful editor and curator, bringing together the voices of other black gay writers at a time when publishers rarely touched their work. His anthologies, such as The Road Before Us, 100 Gay Black Poets, helped create a literary canon for a community fighting to survive and be remembered. But Saint's activism wasn't only through art, it was also personal. He and his white South African partner, John Holmgren, were one of the first openly gay couples to publicly disclose their HIV-positive status in the U.S. Their love and courage stood as a rebuke to the stigma surrounding AIDS and interracial queer relationships. Together, they founded Galleon's Press, which published work by and for the Black LGBTQ+ community. Asado Saint spoke at rallies, performed at benefits, and gave interviews that forced audiences to confront the realities of the AIDS epidemic, especially as it affected Black and brown bodies. He refused to be sanitized for mainstream acceptance. "I am the evidence," he once wrote, "that Black faggots can live and love." Sadly, John Holmgren died in 1993, and Asado Saint followed just a year later, passing on June 29, 1994, at the age of 36. His death marked a profound loss, not just of a gifted artist, but of a cultural leader whose pen had become a sword against injustice. Today, Saint is remembered as a revolutionary one who dared to love, rage, and create in a time of silence. His legacy lives in every verse that demands visibility, in every young queer writer who dares to speak, and in every act of resistance born from truth. Asado Saint didn't just document the AIDS era, he gave it a heartbeat. Kynan Lonsdale. Kynan Lonsdale is an actor, singer, dancer, and changemaker who has emerged as a bold voice for a new era of queer identity. Born on December 19, 1991 in Sydney, Australia, to a Nigerian father and Australian mother, Kynan brings a global and intersectional perspective to both his art and his activism. With a career that spans blockbuster films, hit television shows, and a growing music catalog, Lonsdale has used his platform to challenge outdated ideas about gender, sexuality, and Black masculinity. He first gained international attention playing Wally West Kid Flash on The Flash, and Legends of Tomorrow, becoming one of the few Black superheroes on mainstream TV. But it was his breakout role in Love, Simon 2018, Hollywood's first major studio teen rom-com with a gay lead character, that placed him at the heart of the global LGBTQ+ conversation. In the film, Lonsdale played Bram, the sweet, charming love interest whose reveal marked one of the film's most joyful moments, and for many queer viewers of color, it was deeply affirming. Around the time of the film's release, Kynan came out publicly as queer in a heartfelt Instagram post, later clarifying that he identifies as gender fluid and pansexual. Rather than boxing himself into fixed definitions, Lonsdale embraces a fluid identity that resists categorization. He's spoken openly about his journey through internalized shame, self-discovery, and the freedom that came with finally being able to love himself publicly. In interviews and on social media, Kynan has repeatedly emphasized the importance of self-acceptance and queer joy, particularly for Black youth who are often denied both. His fashion choices are also acts of rebellion and celebration. From red carpets to music videos, Lonsdale wears gowns, crop tops, eyeliner, and glitter not to shock, but to feel alive and authentic. Each outfit tells the world that gender is not a restriction, but a canvas. As a musician, his songs like Kiss the Boy and Rainbow Dragon blend dreamy pop with personal storytelling, offering affirmations of queer love and empowerment. Through his music, he continues to normalize intimacy between men, dismantle toxic masculinity, and radiate confidence in one's truth. Kynan Lonsdale is not part of the tragic HIV/AIDS narrative that defined earlier generations, but he carries their legacy forward by refusing silence. He honors those lost by living loudly, dancing, singing, and loving without fear. In doing so, he creates space for others to bloom. While not a Black lesbian who died of HIV/AIDS, Lonsdale's presence in today's cultural dialogue is a living tribute to those who paved the way. He is part of a lineage of resistance, healing, and hope, one that transforms pain into pride and invisibility into visibility. His story reminds us that the future of queer Black expression is not only alive, but thriving. Willow Smith. Willow Camille Rain Smith, born October 31, 2000 in Los Angeles, was raised at the intersection of fame, creativity, and introspection. As the daughter of Will and Jada Pinkett Smith, she grew up amid Hollywood spectacle, yet she always forged her own path. From her breakout debut, Whip My Hair at age 10, to genre-defying hits like Transparent Soul and Meet Me at Our Spot, Willow has embraced transformation and questioned how identity, love, and belonging intersect on her own terms. Around 2019, Willow publicly shared on Red Table Talk that she experiences attraction to both women and men in meaningful ways. Though never identifying strictly as a lesbian, she later mentioned being open to polyamorous connections and exploring emotion beyond binary labels. Her honesty in discussing attraction and her gentle reflection on selfhood offered a startlingly vulnerable voice for young queer Black minds navigating their own truths. What makes Willow's visibility so resonant is her navigation of family identity and evolving public persona. Supported openly by her mother on Red Table Talk, she represented a model of acceptance rarely visible in mainstream Black culture. She did not come out in a sensationalist way. Instead, she layered her identity with nuance and introspection, showing that gender and sexuality can be intricate, evolving, and deeply individual. Willow's music echoes this evolution. Transparent Soul, with its raw, punk-fueled introspection, addresses authenticity not just in identity, but in emotion. In Meet Me at Our Spot, which became an anthem on social platforms, she explores living and loving in rhythm with one's own frequency. Her lyrics are not performed, they are lived often through experimental sounds and visual symbolism hinting at fluidity, nature, and the transcendence of rigid definitions. Her art resists categories. Willow has blended neo-soul punk Afrofuturism and poetic spoken word in ways that disrupt genre expectations, in much the same way she resists expectations about who she should love or how she should love. She named her 2019 album Willow, and has since released tracks like Female Energy Part 2 titles that reclaim autonomy and power. Willow's influence extends beyond music. She has used her platform to challenge norms around youth mental health, self-love, and queerness. She's spoken about therapy, bipolar health, and how healing from shame is an act of resistance in itself. By modeling introspection and emotional honesty, she invites others to engage with identity on gentle, complex terms. While Willow did not live through the AIDS era, and unlike those memorialized in Part 1 of your video, she remains alive and thriving. She carries forward their legacy in another way. She embodies the freedom they fought for. The freedom to exist publicly, fluidly, and without apology in a world that often demands conformity and shame. In the broader story of LGBTQ+ visibility within Black communities, Willow stands at a unique crossroads. Heritage meets evolution. Childhood fame meets adult introspection, and identity meets discovery. By sharing her journey, she creates space for others, especially Black youth, to understand that love can expand, labels can shift, and healing is a lifelong adventure. Willow Smith may not belong to the generation lost to HIV/AIDS, but she stands in solidarity with them by refusing to shrink. She sings for freedom, questions norms, and holds space for truth, quietly, courageously, and compassionately. Lil Nas X. Montero Lamar Hill, known globally as Lil Nas X, was born on April 9, 1999, in Lithia Springs, Georgia, and later raised in the Atlanta area. He climbed into prominence through a viral sensation, the remix of Old Town Road, which fused rap and country in a way that shattered genre boundaries and dominated streaming charts. Yet what truly set him apart wasn't just his catchy track. It was his unapologetic embrace of self. In June 2019, in the height of his fame, Lil Nas X came out publicly as gay via Twitter and subtly referenced his identity in his lyrics. He had previously hinted at his bisexual attraction, but chose this moment to speak directly, making him one of the first openly gay Black male rappers to reach mainstream superstardom. In doing so, he challenged norms in the hip-hop world, one where LGBTQ+ visibility has often been met with resistance or erasure. From that point forward, Lil Nas X used his music and image to expand the boundaries of Black queer expression. His provocative visuals, like the Satan-themed Montero Call Me By Your Name video, combined with bold fashion and unapologetic sensuality, created cultural shockwaves. He didn't just come out to be tolerated, he came out to be undeniable. His album, Montero and Mixtape 7, consistently confront themes of identity, fame, faith, and the intersection of sin and desirability. In songs like Industry Baby and That's What I Want, he portrays queer desire as natural, celebratory, and even heroic. These songs aren't coded. They openly affirm black gay romance at a scale rarely seen in mainstream music. Though Lil Nas X was not directly impacted by HIV/AIDS, his presence intersects with the legacy of those who were. By speaking so openly, he helps dismantle the shame and erasure that once dictated who could be seen and what stories could be told. He honors the trailblazers who died in silence by ensuring that their successors thrive in visibility. Outside music, Lil Nas X has made headlines for using his platform unapologetically. He's battled backlash from religious leaders, critics, and media commentators with sarcasm, intellect, and defiance. Rather than retreat, he leans harder into his identity, refusing to be boxed in or silenced. His social media presence mixes humor with activism, turning every interaction into a reclamation of joy. In addition to chart success, he also claims space in broader cultural conversations from LGBTQ+ rights to mental health. He has donated to HIV/AIDS organizations, spoken about internalized shame, and encouraged young queer people of color to pursue authenticity over acceptance. While not a victim of the epidemic, he stands in solidarity as a benefactor of the openness generations fought for. Lil Nas X continues evolving as an artist and advocate. At festivals, awards shows, and interviews, he wields his status with tenderness and intentionality, knowing every photo, lyric, or interview can change someone's understanding of identity. In the continuum of LGBTQ+ history, Lil Nas X isn't the end of a story, he's the next chapter. By living boldly, laughing loudly, and loving freely, he honors the legacy of those who came before and models a world where queerness isn't hidden but celebrated. Frenchie Davis. Frenchie Davis is a powerhouse vocalist, a Broadway star, and a proud black lesbian woman who has used her platform to elevate music truth and LGBTQ+ advocacy. Born on May 7, 1979 in Los Angeles, Frenchie first captivated America with her commanding voice on American Idol in 2003. Though controversially disqualified early in the competition due to a prior modeling job, she refused to let that setback define her story. Instead, she built a career grounded in resilience and reinvention. After Idol, Frenchie found her calling in musical theater, where her talent could shine without censorship. She joined the cast of Rent and later wowed audiences in Dreamgirls Ain't Misbehavin' and Effie's Songbook. On stage, her vocal power was undeniable, but offstage, she was also developing into a fierce advocate for self-acceptance, particularly within Black and LGBTQ+ spaces. Her next mainstream breakthrough came in 2011 on NBC's The Voice, where she joined Team Christina Aguilera. Her performances once again showcased her immense vocal range and passion, reminding viewers of the talent that Idol lost too soon. But beyond the music, Frenchie was also carving out space for visibility. That same year, she publicly came out as a lesbian, an act of courage in an industry still hesitant to fully embrace queer black women. What set Frenchie apart wasn't just her identity, it was her refusal to shrink. As a full-figured black, openly gay woman in the entertainment industry, she was a triple threat to norms that often marginalize such intersections. She has consistently spoken out about body positivity, anti-blackness in casting, and the erasure of queer black voices from mainstream media. Frenchie has performed at numerous LGBTQ+ pride events across the country and lent her voice literally and figuratively to causes like marriage equality, HIV/AIDS awareness, and youth empowerment. She's been a vocal supporter of organizations that serve marginalized queer communities, particularly queer youth of color and those living with HIV. While she has not been personally affected by HIV/AIDS, her activism is deeply rooted in honoring those who have. She acknowledges the generations of Black LGBTQ+ individuals who lost their lives in silence and continues to use her platform to uplift their memory and speak out against stigma. Her voice isn't just about high notes, it's about truth, survival, and strength. In a video that honors lives lost to HIV/AIDS, Frenchie Davis stands as a symbol of the living legacy, a proud, out-thriving Black lesbian who carries the history of her community with dignity and visibility. Her story reminds us that the fight didn't end with those who died. It lives on in every artist, activist, and survivor who chooses to be seen and heard. Through her voice, presence, and pride, Frenchie Davis proves that being true to yourself can be a revolutionary act, and that joy, too, is resistance. RuPaul Andre Charles was born on November 17, 1960, in San Diego, California. From his earliest days, he embraced performance as a transformative practice, shaping identity-challenging cliches and commanding space with charisma. Long before becoming a global icon, RuPaul was part of New York's underground club scene, where he honed drag as both art and armor. His rise to mainstream fame began in the 1990s with hits like Supermodel You Better Work, which brought camp glamour and queer joy into the Billboard charts. With high-gloss sheen and a fierce sense of empowerment, RuPaul introduced drag culture to audiences that had rarely seen the artistry or humanity behind it. He wasn't just performing in a costume. He was inviting the world to reconsider gender beauty and Black queer visibility. RuPaul's impact went far beyond music. In 2009, he launched RuPaul's Drag Race, a reality competition that spotlighted drag performers from all walks of life. The show became a global phenomenon, celebrating creativity, humor, vulnerability, and resilience. Through each runway walk, and confession, cam contestants revealed stories not just of lip-sync battles, but of survival, transformation, and thriving amid adversity. RuPaul's influence in the LGBTQ+ community is rooted in a bold philosophy. If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you gonna love somebody else? This line became a mantra for countless queer people, especially Black LGBTQ+ youth, learning to navigate self-acceptance in a world that often denies them both visibility and safety. Although RuPaul did not live through the HIV/AIDS crisis that claimed many of his community members, and he himself is HIV negative, he has never forgotten it. As the disease ravaged gay bars, ballroom scenes, and drag circles, many performers he knew were lost to stigma, neglect, or silence. Though not an activist in the traditional sense, RuPaul has acknowledged these losses publicly, dedicating episodes of his show to their memory, and encouraging his platform to stand for compassion, remembrance, and urgency. His personal life includes a long-term partnership with George LeBar, whom he met in 1994. Though largely kept private, their relationship represents a rare example of durability and love in a world built for spectacle. Together, they quietly defy stereotypes about gay relationships and Black masculinity in celebrity culture. RuPaul's influence extends into fashion publishing and mainstream media. He has signed major modeling contracts, authored books about beauty and self-worth, and guest-starred in TV shows across genres. Through it all, he has remained rooted in authenticity and a devotion to amplifying the voices of those who came before him, the drag queens, trans women, and queer Black artists who shaped the scenes he now stands in. At age 60+, RuPaul continues touring, mentoring, producing new seasons of Drag Race and its worldwide franchises, and maintaining his place as a central figure in queer pop culture. His legacy is not only about fame, it is about opening doors, shifting perception, and creating communities where authenticity and artistry thrive. In remembering icons lost to HIV/AIDS, we honor their lives. In celebrating icons still with us like RuPaul, we acknowledge how far we've come and the work still needed. RuPaul stands as both a bridge and a beacon, a symbol of survival, joy, and the unapologetic freedom to be oneself fiercely and fabulously. Raven Simone. Christina Pierman was born on December 10, 1985, in Atlanta, Georgia. She gained fame early as a precocious performer, winning roles on The Cosby Show and becoming a standout on Disney Channel's That's So Raven, where she played Raven Baxter. Her comedic timing, infectious energy, and charisma made her one of the most beloved child stars in the early 2000s. But it is the evolution of her personal voice and advocacy that truly makes her legacy significant in the context of Black LGBTQ+ history. As she matured, Raven began speaking publicly about her experiences with attraction to both women and men, but rarely used labels. Her openness around fluid sexuality while staying grounded in a deep sense of self helped normalize narratives that looked beyond rigid identity categories. In 2019, she married her partner Miranda Mayday, and rather than declare specific labels, she has continued to honor the authenticity of her experience and relationships. In doing so, she modeled a modern approach to sexuality that is affirming, complex, and deeply personal. Beyond her on-screen work, Raven has consistently challenged norms around race, gender, and ability. She has been vocal about her experiences growing up in the entertainment industry as a plus-size Black woman and the ways those dynamics impacted her sense of self. She has spoken candidly about battling autoimmune conditions and advocating for mental health. That vulnerability has helped shift public conversations, especially for young Black fans grappling with similar struggles. Raven's role in Black LGBTQ+ visibility has been subtle but powerful. While she did not live through the HIV/AIDS epidemic, nor identify as a lesbian, her unapologetic presence as a Black queer woman of influence honors the generations who were erased. Through her interviews, media appearances, and voice, she continues to amplify representation and self-acceptance. Academically, Raven graduated from the University of Maryland Global Campus with an honors degree in interdisciplinary studies emphasizing media and visual design. She has built a brand that balances creativity, social media engagement, and activism. Raven is known for speaking up when it matters, whether it's addressing racism, in casting sizeism in Hollywood, or advocating for LGBTQ+ inclusivity in children's programming. Though she has not been part of HIV-related narratives, Raven often references those earlier pioneers, especially Black queer artists and activists, as her inspirations. She uses her platform to honor those who came before and encourages young queer fans to pursue truth regardless of label shame or fear. In the broader arc of your video topic about Black LGBTQ+ people whose lives and deaths shaped history, Raven Simonet represents a living continuation of that legacy. She embodies the freedom that survivors fought for. She demonstrates what visibility can mean when it is rooted in love, integrity, and resilience. Raven Simonet reminds us that identity is not a label. It's a journey of self-discovery, healing, and insistence on being seen. Her story resonates not because it retraces the pain of loss, but because it celebrates what is possible when someone dares to live fully, love openly, and shine without apology. Out. Laverne Cox. Laverne Cox was born on May 29, 1972 in Mobile, Alabama, and emerged as a cultural force who redefined what it means to exist authentically in both the public eye and advocacy spaces. Best known for her powerful portrayal of Sophia Bursay on Orange is the New Black, Cox broke boundaries as the first openly transgender woman to earn a Primetime Emmy nomination for acting amplifying trans Black stories in unprecedented ways. From early in her career, Cox challenged mainstream erasure of transgender people, particularly trans women of color. Her presence on screen rippled beyond entertainment. It demanded attention to the systemic violence, healthcare inequity, and socioeconomic exclusion facing many in her community. By embodying Sophia, a character living with HIV, Cox helped humanize the epidemic at a time when compassion and accurate representation were desperately needed. Her visibility fueled activism beyond the camera. In 2014, she became the first openly transgender person featured on the cover of Time magazine. She has since addressed world leaders at the United Nations, spoken alongside the late Marsha P. Johnson's legacy, and asserted that LGBTQ+ rights are intrinsically linked with racial justice and public health. Cox has been candid about systemic issues facing trans women with HIV, from lack of insurance to incarceration risk to dismissive medical institutions. She's also openly shared her own health journey. In 2020, she underwent facial feminization surgery and documented her mental and physical healing process, reminding others that gender-affirming care and self-love are essential to overall well-being. While she has not been diagnosed with HIV, Cox has repeatedly framed the struggle against stigma and shame in solidarity with those who were lost to AIDS, especially Black trans women who historically died invisible. She dedicates airtime social media presence and public speeches to raising funding for HIV/AIDS organizations and uplifting grassroots trans-led services, often underfunded or marginalized. Laverne's activism embraced art education and community care. She champions voter mobilization recovery programs, shelter for transgender youth, and cultural institutions that preserve queer history. In 2021, she founded Rising with Translove, a movement focused on creating safety nets and healing spaces for LGBTQ+ people of color navigating trauma and illness. Her well-earned accolades, including Glamour's Women of the Year and the NAACP Image Award, carry deeper meaning. Each award helps broaden visibility, shifting culture toward greater empathy, representation, and justice. Laverne. Cox's legacy is not determined by fame alone. It is rooted in disruption, dismantling rigid gender norms, demanding healthcare equity, and ensuring that the lives lost to HIV/AIDS, especially trans women of color, are honored through justice and continued visibility. Her story echoes the theme of Part 1, that where silence once reigned, bravery now speaks. Cox embodies resilience forged by heritage and hope. She insists that stories of struggle matter, voices of resistance matter, and that truth can't be erased. In the continuum of LGBTQ+ history, Laverne Cox stands not just as a survivor, but as a living tribute to those who bravely stood before her and those who walk beside her today. Andrew Gillum. Andrew Demise Gillum was born on July 26, 1979, in Miami, Florida. A rising star in the Democratic Party, he served on the Tallahassee City Commission, became mayor in 2014, and rose to nationwide attention as the Democratic nominee for governor of Florida in 2018. His campaign sparked excitement for Black political leadership and progressive policy, but his evolution toward openly discussing his sexuality made an even deeper cultural impact. For many years, Gillum lived as a married man with children, a public identity shaped by conservative regional expectations. However, in March 2022, he shared a deeply personal revelation: he is bisexual. His thoughtful interview on Tamron Hall was historic, marking him as one of the few prominent Black American politicians to publicly affirm attraction to both men and women. At a moment when bisexual visibility is often minimized, Gillum's confession rippled beyond politics into social commentary about honesty, shame, and progress. Gillum's journey through identity was not without struggle. He spoke openly about grappling with internalized homophobia, fear of public rejection, and the tension of being both a politician and a queer man in the southern United States. Yet he chose to speak. In so doing, he challenged the silence that has historically shaped experiences of many Black LGBTQ+ individuals, especially those in leadership, where personal truth can be misused or weaponized. Professionally, Gillum has been known for progressive stances on healthcare access, voting rights, racial justice, and economic equity. While governor, he visited pivotal communities, focusing on school funding, LGBTQ+ inclusivity, and public health issues. Through vulnerability and policy, he became a symbol not just of political ambition, but of evolving definitions of leadership in Black America. Though Gillum did not live through the HIV/AIDS crisis, nor has he been personally affected by it. His coming out intersects deeply with the legacy of those lost. When he spoke, he evoked generations of Black LGBTQ+ people whose lives were shaped and sometimes cut short by stigma, erasure, and illness. He offered them visibility now that they could no longer claim it themselves. As a bisexual Black man in politics, Gillum confronts a space where bisexuality is often invalidated. Yet he perseveres, emphasizing that the truth of his attraction doesn't erase who he loves, served, or represents. In doing so, he expands the narrative. Black sexuality is not monolithic. Identity is not fixed. Leadership need not be silent. Since his gubernatorial campaign, Gillum's public roles have shifted toward activism, commentary, and mentorship. He remains a speaker at political events, educational forums, and community initiatives where he often addresses mental health, self-forgiveness, and the importance of authenticity in public life. In the continuum of LGBTQ+ and Black political history, Andrew Gillum represents an emerging chapter, one of resilience, introspection, and expanded identity. He may not be part of the earlier generation's struggle with HIV/AIDS, but his presence offers a living testament to how far visibility has come and how necessary it still is. Andrew Gillum's narrative reminds us that courage isn't always performed on a stage. It's often spoken quietly, honestly, and at great personal risk. By claiming his truth, he bridges past and present, honoring those who could not speak and empowering future truth-tellers to rise with confidence and compassion. Victoria Monet. Victoria Monet was born on May 1, 1989 in Atlanta, Georgia. From early talent showcases to co-writing chart-topping hits for major artists, she quickly emerged as a force in modern music. But it was her evolution into a solo artist and openly queer public figure that cemented her as a role model for a new generation of Black queer performers. Monet began her career behind the scenes writing and producing for artists like Ariana Grande, Chloe X Holly, and Nas. With her sharp lyricism and emotional honesty, she helped craft hits such as Thank You Next and Seven Rings. Yet while her influence was felt, her own voice remained largely unseen until she stepped into the spotlight. Her solo debut, Jaguar Rising 2021, revealed her as a vocalist unafraid to explore genre identity and desire. The album blends sultry R&B, funk, and pop sensibilities. Songs like On My Mama and Party Girls pulsate with confidence and a celebration of queer ecstasy. Through her music, Monet created space where Black queer love isn't just visible, it's vibrant. In public statements, Victoria has shared that she experiences attraction across gender lines and identifies within the queer community. She has never confined herself to rigid labels, valuing emotional connection over gender. This refusal to fit neatly into boxes aligns her with a lineage of queer Black artists whose identities defy simplistic definition. Though not impacted by the HIV/AIDS crisis in the way earlier generations were, Monet's presence is a counterpoint to the silence many experienced. She represents the progress born from decades of activism, visibility, acceptance, and artistry. By living openly while rising in mainstream pop, she honors those whose stories were erased and creates new possibilities for those still struggling. Victoria Monet has also used her platform to advocate for Black queer culture and youth empowerment. She performs at Pride events, highlights trans voices in interviews, and supports organizations focused on mental health and self-love. Her artistic output is matched by a clear commitment to authenticity and solidarity. She has become a style icon whose fashion choices blend high glamour and queer aesthetic play. Whether on red carpets or social media, Monet's looks tell stories of liberation, fluidity, and ancestral pride. She embodies a Black queerness that's transcendent but grounded, fearless yet tender. Monet's impact extends beyond her music. She frequently speaks about the importance of mental wellness, especially within performance spaces. Her openness around therapy, grief, and personal growth offers listeners more than tunes. It extends compassion, encouragement, and affirmation. Though Victoria Monet did not live through the tragic losses of the HIV/AIDS era, She stands as a living testament to what survivors and those lost fought for: the freedom to exist, create, and love out loud. Her art doesn't minimize struggle, it transforms it, turning personal truth into collective joy. Victoria Monet reminds us that legacy is not only about what came before, but what we choose to build now. She bridges eras, honoring those silenced, embracing those still fighting, and inspiring a future in which Black queer identity is celebrated, not erased. Meshell Ndegeocello. Meshell Ndegeocello is a musical chameleon, a poetic storyteller, and one of the earliest mainstream Black queer women in the music industry to make her identity part of her art, not as a gimmick, but as a spiritual truth. Born Michelle Lynn Johnson on August 29, 1968, in Berlin, Germany, and raised in Washington, D.C., Meshell's sound emerged from a deep well of funk, jazz, hip-hop, and soul. Her artistry defied category from the very beginning, and so did her identity. In the early 1990s, at a time when LGBTQ+ representation in Black music was practically non-existent, Meshell burst onto the scene with her debut album, Plantation Lullabies. Her bass-heavy grooves, radical lyrics, and powerful stage presence made her one of the first openly bisexual or queer female artists signed to a major label. Her sexual identity was not hidden. It was central to her creative output. A bold move in an era where the industry was not welcoming to anything outside of heteronormativity. Meshell didn't ask for permission. She sang about same-sex love, queer heartbreak, racial politics, and spiritual longing in a way that was honest, unapologetic, and deeply human. Songs like "If That's Your Boyfriend, He Wasn't Last Night" and "Leviticus Faggot" openly challenged homophobia and hypocrisy in both Black and mainstream America. She made space, carving out room for Black queer women to see themselves not as side characters, but as the center of emotional, sensual, and political stories. Throughout her decades-long career, Meshell has collaborated with artists across genres: John Mellencamp, Madonna, the Rolling Stones, Chaka Khan, and has released a catalog that remains one of the most experimental and consistent bodies of work in soul music. Her influence quietly echoes in artists like Frank Ocean, Janelle Monáe, and even Victoria Monet, who embrace fluidity and use music to question the binary. Though Meshell is not part of the generation who died from HIV/AIDS, her music has long served as a memorial, a resistance, and a prayer. She has acknowledged the pain and loss endured by queer communities, particularly Black lesbians and gay men during the height of the epidemic. Her performances often carry a spiritual energy, offering solace, space for grief, and a reminder of the resilience that remains. Offstage, Meshell is known for her quiet wisdom. She avoids the spotlight, focusing instead on creating meaningful music, mentoring young artists, and living in alignment with her values. Her life and work embody the possibility of being radically true in a world that demands compromise. In a video that honors those lost to HIV/AIDS, Meshell Ndegeocello stands as a living tribute to their legacy. She is not a victim of the disease, but a vessel of the stories they were never allowed to tell. Through her voice, bass, and fearless truth, she makes sure they are never forgotten. Meshell Ndegeocello is proof that queer Black visibility can be poetic, powerful, and permanent. She reminds us that survival is not just endurance, it's creating a world where others can live free. Andre Leon Talley. Andre Leon Talley was a towering figure in the world of fashion, quite literally standing over 6 feet tall with commanding presence and style that blended Southern charm, intellectual rigor, and unapologetic visibility. Born on October 16, 1948 in Washington, D.C., he grew up in Durham, North Carolina, raised by his grandmother in a segregated society that offered few safe spaces for creative Black boys. Yet Talley's curiosity for style, beauty, and culture couldn't be contained. He pursued his studies at Brown University and later at the Sorbonne in Paris, where his immersion in literature, art, and European haute couture intersected with an emerging Black queer intellect. Upon returning to New York in the 1970s, Tally cut a striking figure in the downtown LGBTQ+ scene, dressed in bold capes, colorful scarves, and the kinds of voluminous coats that would become his hallmark. His style was radical resistance. Tally joined Vogue in the mid-1980s and rose quickly, becoming fashion news director, then cultural editor, and ultimately Vogue's first African-American creative director under Anna Wintour. At a moment when fashion was overwhelmingly white and straight, Tally insisted that black designers, models, and queer creatives belong at every table. He advocated for icons like Azzedine Alaïa, Thierry Mugler, and Pat Cleveland, and pushed black supermodels like Naomi Campbell into the center of global fashion visibility. But Tally's influence was never solely about aesthetics. He understood that fashion is storytelling, and Angela Davis or Daniele Luna on a magazine cover was a political act. He curated runway shows, wrote hundreds of articles, and mentored countless queer black talent. He used his power to shift narratives around race, class, gender expression, and queerness in spaces where invisibility had been the norm. Though Tally neither contracted HIV nor died from AIDS, his life and work existed alongside an unfolding epidemic that disproportionately affected black LGBTQ+ communities. He bore witness to friends, colleagues, and muses lost to the virus. And while he rarely spoke publicly about the crisis, his insistence on dignity, artistry, and structural inclusion acted as a moral counterpoint to a world plagued by stigma and silence. After leaving Vogue in 2013, he published memoirs, collaborated on documentaries, and remained a visible advocate for queer black creativity. He celebrated ballroom culture, drag artistry, and the lineage of black LGBTQ+ resistance from the Club Kid era of New York to the legendary runway houses. His friendships spanned generations: Aaliyah Grace Jones, Alvin Ailey, and younger voices like Janelle Monáe, whom he supported early in her transition from music into queer visibility. Tally passed away in January 2022 at age 73. Memorials across fashion institutions and queer halls of fame underscored the magnitude of his loss. But his legacy lives on, not just in the glossy pages of fashion, but in the lives of those who found representation because he refused to center anything but truth and beauty. In a narrative honoring those lost to HIV/AIDS, Andre Leon Talley stands as a monument to presence over erasure. Though not part of the epidemic's statistics, he dedicated his life to honoring voices suppressed by prejudice. He showed how style can be radical, mentorship can be revolutionary, and visibility can transform systems. If we remember icons who lived out loud and insisted that others could too, then Tally's life becomes part of the story we tell. Frank Ocean. Christopher Edwin Breaux, known globally as Frank Ocean, was born on October 28, 1987, in Long Beach, California, and raised in New Orleans. His journey to musical acclaim defied mainstream expectations. A black queer man whose art eschewed genre conventions and demanded emotional honesty. Ocean quietly became one of the most respected voices in modern music when Channel Orange 2012 swept critical acclaim, earning him a Grammy and cementing his voice as both vulnerable and visionary. But it was his coming out in July 2012, posted quietly on Tumblr, that created cultural resonance. In a short, unassuming note, he described falling in love with another man, a revelation that rippled across hip-hop and R&B communities where queer identities have often been marginalized or suppressed. His decision was historic, not because it was loud or confrontational, but because it was deeply brave. Ocean didn't seek validation or spectacle. He simply shared his truth in his own way. That moment opened doors for queer black artists in spaces that still struggle to accept them. It quietly demanded that authenticity, no matter how uncomfortable, be met with artful acceptance. Ocean's catalog reflects this tension. Blonde, 2016. His critically celebrated follow-up explored intimacy loss and transformation through sparse production and melancholic lyricism. Songs like Nike's Solo Reprise and Ivy eschewed growls for emotional nuance. His lyrics leaned into queerness and grief, unafraid to evoke queer heartbreak, longing, and self-reflection. His music became a spiritual mirror for fans grappling with identity, racism, and emotional honesty. Though Ocean doesn't live within the HIV/AIDS narrative chronologically, his visibility amplifies the voices of those lost. His artistry bridges eras, honoring pioneers who could not speak out and enabling others to speak and heal with precision and grace. His aesthetic, a blend of minimalism, nostalgia, and soul, remains deeply human. Ocean's public persona is muted yet powerful. He rarely performs, keeps social media minimal, and often takes years between projects. Yet each release is a cultural event. His 2019 magazine Boys Don't Cry and the eponymous magazine's track Blonde sold out instantly, showcasing his ability to connect to audiences on his own terms. His absence often speaks as loudly as his songs. Beyond music, Ocean's presence shifts conversation. He has supported community causes, attended LGBTQ+ events, and collaborated visually with queer directors. He insists that love need not fit labels, that pain can be rendered beautifully, and that queerness can be felt even in silence. For Black queer youth observing his quiet revolution, Ocean stands as proof that you don't need approval to exist, and that truth, when held in tenderness, can become universal. While Frank Ocean wasn't part of the generation lost to HIV/AIDS, he inherits their legacy by refusing clarity in the face of silence. He shows a new way forward, living queer living, Black and living honest without apology. In the story you tell about the lives defined by loss and the legacies they left. Frank Ocean is part of what comes next, a living tribute to vulnerability, imagination, and the right to feel fully. Cardi B, Belcalis Marlenis Almanzar, known around the world as Cardi B, was born on October 11, 1992, in the Bronx, New York. Raised in a Dominican Trinidadian household, Cardi brought the grit, authenticity, and humor of her upbringing into every aspect of her rising career. She first captured public attention through social media, where her candid commentary, humor, and fierce perspective made her a breakout star. But beyond the personality was intention. Cardi owns her narrative, and she does so loudly and unapologetically. Her rise from stripper to chart-topping rapper, including hits like Bodak Yellow I Like It and WAP, was meteoric. As she climbed, she became known not only for beats, but for her realness, discussing sex, femininity, motherhood, and relationships without shame or sugarcoating. When she shared her attraction to both men and women, she did so not as a performer, but as a human being claiming emotional truth. Though Cardi does not identify as a lesbian, she has been clear about her attraction to women at different points in her life. She has repeatedly emphasized that gender does not determine love or desire. In doing so, she has helped dismantle narratives that insist attraction must fit neatly in fixed boxes. Her journey highlights the existence and validity of sexual fluidity, especially within Black and Latinx communities, where that openness is often stigmatized. Cardi's cultural impact goes beyond music. She has used her platform to talk about sexual liberation, Pan-African pride, and the intersections of queerness and femininity. She challenges stereotypes about femininity in hip-hop and educates audiences on what it means to claim your sexuality without apology. Her activism, even if not traditionally framed in health or politics, affirms that self-acceptance is a radical act. She remains a relatable figure, a mother of two navigating fame, relationships, and criticism alongside millions of young fans. Cardi's willingness to share her life authentically, whether about bisexual curiosity, marital dynamics, or body image, offers visibility to those who rarely see their experiences reflected in mainstream culture. While she has not been personally impacted by HIV/AIDS, Cardi honors the legacy of those lost in part by refusing to silence uncomfortable truths. She reminds listeners that the pandemic impacted Black queer spaces deeply, and that continued visibility helps dismantle remnants of fear and shame. Cardi B's story illustrates a shift in how we think about sexuality in celebrity culture. In a narrative honoring those who died of AIDS, she serves as an example of what the next generation built one, where queer truth can be incorporated into success artistry and mainstream love. She didn't suffer in silence. She expanded what it means to be powerful, visible, and queer-adjacent in an era where open identity was once dangerous. In the broader arc of LGBTQ+ history, Cardi B represents progress. She lives where silence once ruled, and she speaks where others once whispered. Her voice is not just musical, it is revolutionary, a reminder that queer love can be messy, powerful, complicated, and unapologetically public. Tessa Thompson. Tessa Lynn Thompson was born on October 3, 1983 in Los Angeles, California, into a family rooted in creativity and cultural awareness. Her mother is Afro-Panamanian, and her father is African-American, and growing up in a household that bridged art, social justice, and global identity shaped who she would become. Thompson's journey has always been about more than acting. It's about telling stories that shift how we see race, gender, and love. She began acting early, appearing in The Chris Rock Show and in indie films like ATL and Medicine for Melancholy. But her breakthrough came with roles that demanded presence and complexity. As Valkyrie in Thor Ragnarok 2017, she brought strength, humor, and ambiguity to a franchise star. In Creed 2015 and its sequels, she embodied female resilience and emotional honesty. And in Annihilation 2018, she explored grief, identity, and transformation in a mind-bending sci-fi setting. Yet Tessa Thompson's personal story is just as powerful. In 2018, she addressed widespread speculation following paparazzi photos with musician Janelle Monáe. Though she emphasized that labels felt too narrow to describe her experience, she confirmed she has been in relationships with women and men. Rather than adopt a fixed identity, she speaks openly about fluid attraction, emotional connection, and the freedom to redefine self on her own terms. In public appearances and interviews, she consistently names queerness as part of her evolution, not performance. Throughout her career, Tessa has been a vocal advocate for LGBTQ+ representation, especially for Black queer characters in mainstream storytelling. She has emphasized that characters like Valkyrie are revolutionary not because they embody stereotypes, but because they exist unapologetically. On Sylvie's Love Passing or Dear White People, she chooses roles that navigate love, loyalty, and self-discovery, seen through lenses that challenge traditional Hollywood narratives. Beyond acting, Thompson uses her platform to engage with pressing social issues, intersectional feminism, gender-expansive identity, and the legacy of Black LGBTQ+ resistance. She has been open about loving outside the binaries people expect her to honor. This refusal to fit neatly into public categories aligns her with a lineage of queer Black women who resisted erasure through art and personal truth. While Tessa Thompson is not part of the generation lost to the HIV/AIDS epidemic, her presence in today's cultural conversation serves as a living tribute to those who paved the way. Her openness about attraction and evolving identity stands in contrast to past decades of silence and secrecy, in that she honors the brave souls whose names were forgotten or erased by shame. Thompson's career is a testament to depth and intention. Each role is chosen not just for art, but for impact. She has helped normalize queer Black intimacy on screens, where it was once overlooked or deemed too complicated. She highlights how love can transcend gender, how identity can transcend labels, and how visibility itself can be an act of resistance. In the broader story, your video tells about Black LGBTQ+ lives shaped by love, loss, defiance, and dignity. Tessa Thompson represents what can flourish in the legacy of those who were lost. She stands for what is possible when silence is broken, love is honored, and identity is fearlessly embraced. Through every performance and every statement, Thompson embodies the power of visibility for herself and for all those still fighting to be seen. Azialia Banks. Azialia Amanda Banks was born on May 31, 1991 in Harlem, New York. She rose to fame in her early 20s with the breakthrough track 212, a raw fusion of hip-hop house and experimental pop that introduced her as a bold new voice, lyrically sharp, rhythmically daring, and unafraid to shake conventions. She quickly became both celebrated and polarizing, known equally for her fiery lyricism as for her candid commentary on identity, race, and desire. From the outset, Azealia rejected neat categorization. She has spoken openly about being attracted to both men and women, and her music and public persona reflect a refusal to be constrained by binary labels. In interviews and social media posts, she has described intimate experiences with women and men, often refusing to define her sexuality beyond emotional connection. Her fluidity, sometimes interpreted as bisexuality, pansexuality, or sexual nuance, has made her an emblem of shifting modern identity narratives. In her music, she blends genres unapologetically, whether rapping over breakbeats, electronic dance backdrops, or sharp-edged melodies. Banks' artistry centers control over her story. Tracks like 212 and Licorice are not just earworms, they're statements about Black female power, sexual agency, and lyrical mastery. She merges underground authenticity with mainstream ambition, carving space for queer Black expression in alternate pop spaces. Azealia's public life is equal parts performance and declaration. She has been outspoken on topics others avoid: racial tension, institutional homophobia, industry hypocrisy, and systemic bias. Her willingness to voice anger and truth, though often met with backlash, makes her a representative of queer truth-telling that refuses softness. This recklessness and honesty are part of her art. While she was never part of the generation devastated by HIV/AIDS, Azealia's boundary-breaking existence intersects conceptually with cultural legacies of queerness and survival. Her refusal to apologize for self-expression and her insistence on owning her sexual narrative continue the work of queer Black artists who had to conceal parts of themselves even as HIV claimed their lives. She makes visible what once had to be hidden. Offstage, Banks has embraced art direction, fashion design, and independent production. She often collaborates with queer creatives and promotes street-level visual artists, especially Black women and LGBTQ+ collaborators. She pushes back against mainstream casting and publishing systems, using her platform to highlight voices that mainstream culture often overlooks or erases. Despite controversies and self-imposed exile from some media, Azealia Banks remains a testament to creative sovereignty. Her existence resists the mainstream's comfort zones and invites discomfort, questioning, and the refusal to be silent. Her career underscores how identity, when fully expressed, is revolutionary. In the context of honoring those lost to HIV/AIDS, Azealia Banks stands as a reminder that queer freedom today rests on the courage of those who came before. She carries their legacy by choosing visibility, reckoning with pain openly, and insisting her sexuality is her own to define on her own terms. Banks' life reminds us that representation is not about fitting in, it's about breaking through. She models fearless self-expression in a world that still struggles to make space for difference. In her turbulence, music, and truth-telling, she embodies a lineage of Black queerness that refuses erasure even today. Sapphire Ramona Lofton. Ramona Lofton, better known by her pen name Sapphire, was born on August 4, 1950 in Fort Ord, California. Raised in Harlem and later on Staten Island, she absorbed the rhythms of jazz, gospel, and street poetry. From an early age, she knew words could hurt, heal, and ultimately liberate. That belief became the backbone of her career. In 1996, she published Push, a novel that punched into national consciousness with unflinching honesty. It became an acclaimed bestseller and was later adapted into the award-winning film Precious. Push tells the story of Precious, an illiterate Black teenager living in Harlem, abused and pregnant, who dreams of escaping poverty and trauma through education. Sapphire's writing is raw, everyday Black vernacular filled with pain, perseverance, and resilience. She didn't sanitize grief, she stained every sentence with force. That visceral style made the novel controversial, but it also made it impossible to ignore. In interviews, Sapphire has spoken openly about loving both men and women, and her bisexual identity informs the emotional depth of her characters. She understands how desire intersects with violence, how love can feel both dangerous and redemptive. She centers Black female experience with erotic complexity and moral conflict. Her fiction refuses neat moral resolutions. Instead, it holds space for grief, sex, rage, and survival all in the same breath. Though Sapphire is not part of the generation lost to HIV/AIDS, the political dimensions of her career align closely with those whose voices were silenced. She has used her writing to indict systems that fail Black women, queer folks, and those experiencing homelessness or mental health crises. Her pen becomes testimony demanding empathy where shame once ruled. Sapphire's follow-up works like The Kid 2011 and Black Wings and Blind Angels 2006 continue themes of survival and reclamation. The Kid follows 15-year-old Kalinda Kitty Forrest, who goes to prison for killing her abusive mother. It's more nightmare than fairy tale exploring mother-daughter bonds strained by addiction, sex work, and systemic neglect. Yet hope flickers in small acts of agency, hard-won, volatile, and real. Her activism extends beyond page count. She has spoken at the PEN America Prison Writing Program and worked with survivors of mass incarceration. While not an AIDS activist explicitly, Sapphire's work uplifts voices often erased by medical neglect, homelessness, or social invisibility, many intersecting with those affected by HIV/AIDS. Sapphire maintains a deliberate distance from celebrity culture. She rarely discusses her private life, choosing instead to focus on mentorship and literary resistance. Her interviews focus on obligation, not fame. She insists her responsibility is to truth. "There's no fame without courage," she says. For a video honoring Black queer trailblazers lost to AIDS, Sapphire's presence is essential. Though she survived, her fiction captures the painful textures of those erased. She gives them back words, flesh, and dignity. She refutes silence by insisting on full representation, Black, queer, working-class woman survivor. Sapphire's legacy is in every reader who finds themselves in Precious's voice. She teaches that survival includes being heard, that literature, when unleashed, can reclaim memory, body, and community. In honoring the lives lost to HIV/AIDS, Sapphire's art reclaims the dignity they were denied. She reminds us that writing can be revolutionary, especially when it is unsparing, fierce, and deeply Black. These 20 powerful stories remind us that Black queer voices have long been silenced by stigma, illness, and systemic neglect, but they will not be forgotten. Whether through art, activism, or personal courage, each of these women left behind a legacy that demands recognition. At Legends of Black Excellence, we honor their lives not just in memory, but through continued conversation. Which of these women's stories moved you the most? And why do you think their names are missing from mainstream history? Let us know in the comments, like this video if it taught you something new, and don't forget to subscribe